Welcome to Happy Pace, the only podcast that we know of that is recorded while running. My name is Elaine Sims, and I am one half of the co-hosting team Gretchen Brune and Elaine Sims. As a birthday present to the best co-host in podcasting, Gretchen Brune, we are dropping not one, but 2 episodes in one day. Happy birthday, Gretchen! To say we are honored to host today's guest would be an understatement. Jason Fitzgerald is the host of one of the top-ranking, if not the top-ranking running podcast in all of running podcasts, Strength Running. We did something different this episode. We sat down. Now, I'm a longtime listener of Strength Running, and I shamelessly was excited throughout this entire Zoom interview. In this interview, Jason unknowingly calls both Gretchen and I out for our bad training habits in the most constructive way possible. Now, before we both forget, the best way to support Happy Pace is to subscribe. Then you can weigh in on our Spotify polls each episode, follow us on our Instagram at happy_pace_podcast, and you can also find us on TikTok and actually Reddit if you do enough digging. Now relax and get seated this episode to join us in our Happy Pace. Thank you so much for being willing to do this. I'm like such a huge fan too, so this is like I'm nerding out at the same time. So I really appreciate it. Gretchen, you didn't hear us talking about it. We were talking about how basically Jason's been working on or like trying to figure out how to better like train for the fall for short races. It started kind of cutting out because of the internet. So he was just talking about his training.
Nice. What are you training for?
Nothing.
Nothing?
I'm just trying to stay consistent during a tough summer.
Yeah.
About 7 weeks of difficulty, and then I can prioritize being a lot more consistent after that.
Gotcha.
So like tomorrow, I likely won't be able to run. I might like go for a hike, but I can't really run. So I'm just dealing with those kinds of constraints, which of course isn't ideal, but hey, it's part of life.
Well, I'm also not training for anything, if that makes you feel any better.
I just ran a really slow downhill mile the other day at our annual downhill mile race in St. Louis, and I was not training for that, and it very much showed, so...
Miles hurt when you're not trained for them.
As we talk about, like, training, I feel like we can just move into more of, like, why we showed up today, why we're here today. And Jason, it is such an honor for us to have you here. Jason, you have your own podcast called Strength Running. How long have you been doing that podcast? And give us a little overview of what that podcast is.
So yeah, the Strength Running podcast is now almost 8 years old. Right before I jumped on here, I recorded the intro to episode 359. So I've been doing it it feels like forever, but it's the most fun thing that I do in my work, and I really love having the kinds of conversations that I do on my podcast. And I think it's best to think of my podcast for any runner who wants to get better. And what I try to do is think about all of the subject matter experts that might be advising a pro or elite runner, and then bring all those people to you. So you don't have to be any level of competitiveness, but you're going to benefit from hearing from running coaches, nutritionists and dietitians, sports psychologists, physical therapists, strength experts, all the people that are going to help, a pro runner get to that highest level of performance possible. We can learn from that too, and that's what I try to do with podcasts, is bring in all those subject matter experts so that, the adult runner can get as much value as possible.
You're talking about like who you bring on in terms of subject matter experts. How do you like vet your SMEs?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I do look for people who have experience, who typically have some sort of credential or credentials. I also like to bring in people who work directly with runners. So, for example, physical therapists. There's a lot of physical therapists out there, but if I find a physical therapist who also is a competitive runner or triathlete, and they happen to specialize in endurance athletes, they're probably going to be a good candidate for my podcast. I'm basically looking for people who are going to be helpful and have some real expertise in whatever area that they focus on. So whether you're a sports psychologist working with high-level athletes somewhere, there's a lot of lessons we can draw from that and apply to, the average runner, the recreational runner who's in his 40s and 50s and he's trying to run a good time in his second marathon. There's a lot we can learn from these people. So vetting has to be usually some type of credential, a lot of experience doing what they do. Are they contributing to other work elsewhere? So are they writing books? Are they, starting businesses in the industry? Anything that gives me indication that this person really knows what they're doing and has something valuable to offer the running community. Because that's sort of like my ultimate litmus test for anything. Is this person, or even an advertiser that wants to come on the podcast as a sponsor, are they going to be helpful to my audience? That is the most basic litmus test that I have. Do they have something valuable that they are going to offer my audience that's going to help them be a little bit more strategic with their training or think about their training in a more methodical way so that ultimately we can all run faster and reach our goals?
I mean, there's so much misinformation for runners online that I find it very valuable listening to your podcast, partially because I know someone has, gone and vetted those, not only the guests that you have on there, but like you said, you evaluate your potential sponsors and you talk about that every single episode. Besides, just asking that one litmus test, is there anything else you use to evaluate a potential sponsor?
Yeah, for sponsors, obviously number one is, do I think some runners could benefit from this? And look, not everything is going to appeal to every single runner. So there are certainly some products that I promote that might be good for some runners and not good for other runners. And so I think it's just important to know that just because not everything is specifically for you doesn't mean that it can't also be quite helpful for other runners. The other thing is just basically congruency. Is this a health and fitness running related product or service that I think is going to help you better achieve your goals? Because I turn down sponsors all the time who want me to pitch some weird technology or app that doesn't really have anything to do with my audience. Sorry, I'm not promoting insurance on the Strength Running podcast. That's just doesn't make any sense to me. So it's number one, is it helpful? Number two, is it actually within the range of topics that I covered on the podcast? And, is a company that is investing in the running community, and this isn't always 100% true, but it definitely endears me to a sponsor when, are they sponsoring a lot of other running podcasts or races? Are they sponsoring elite athletes? In other words, are they putting their money where their mouth is? Are they actually investing in the running community and trying to grow the sport in that way? When sponsors are doing that, I'm more likely to say yes because I want to reward them for their investment in sport.
Well, I mean, there's so much money in running, but it's not to those elite athletes that you're talking about. So I think I was looking it up, and the average runner in the U.S. spends about $1,000 a year. And those elite and professional athletes, we need those sponsors and we need those people, those organizations and companies to really put the money into the runners. I'm sure elite athletes who don't really have the highest benefits and sports package that they could potentially have. I've heard being injured almost can really ruin your career that way.
Yeah, it's a very tenuous position to be in, to be a professional endurance runner, because your paycheck is not always, but is often tied to your performances, and obviously you can't perform when you're tired, when you're injured, so that's obviously not going to work. But yeah, I mean, we need these companies to invest in the sport. So it always irks me a little bit. Once in a while you'll get an occasional mediocre or negative review on your podcast because the ads are too long. It's well, if the podcast didn't make any money, then there would be a podcast, and that would hurt the running community, and that money wouldn't be flowing into the running industry. And so, yeah, that's kind of a short-sighted look at podcast advertisers that I don't think actually serves the sport.
That's fair. When looking at all of the materials that you post, you do provide a substantial amount of detailed and well-researched materials for free. I mean, you also do, I believe, have a lot of resources behind a paywall, but why do you keep so much of it for free?
Good question. Maybe I'm not running a great business over here. I mean, look, ultimately at the end of the day, I think I just want to help runners achieve their potential, run really well, love the sport, just get everything out of it that I got out of it over, the 25 plus years that I've been a runner. Yeah, so I have a blog and a podcast and a YouTube channel, and I give all that out for free. Yes, I have some paid programs, and so I guess my idea is if you like my perspective on running and you think that it's a good one, you think I actually provide all that value, wait until you try a paid program and really apply all of these lessons in a focused way. You're going to be able to take your running to a very high level because of that, in my opinion, because, the free content is fantastic and I will continue doing it and serving the running community in that way. But, if you want the equivalent of like 35 podcast episodes condensed into an actionable step-by-step approach, well, you could try to figure that out on yourself, but I'm a big believer in just hiring an expert to help you get to the next level. You're probably not doing all the plumbing work in your house. I know I'm not. I hire an expert to do that. And it's the same thing with running. Why do we think, as someone who's been running for 6 months, we know how to train for a marathon? That's a very difficult physiological thing to do. Or even something as nebulous as, I want to stay healthy. A lot of things go into that, so how do you create a more structured approach to that goal? All these goals can sort of be broken down into a little bit of a step-by-step approach, and that's what I try to do in my paid work. But yeah, for the most part, most of my content is free. Yes, some of my content has advertisers on it. I've never had advertisers on the Strength Running website, so you're never going to see like banner ads or, try this secret potion for, this, get flat abs or some crazy BS like that. So I try to stay away from a lot of that stuff or ads that I don't have any control over. So if you just put banner ads on your website, yeah, you don't really know what's going to be displayed. It's sort of up to the advertising platform. So I try to gatekeep my content very strongly when it comes to advertisers. But yeah, for the most part, it's 98% free.
I know you are also a coach. How many are you doing just one-on-one coaching with?
Yeah, so I basically have 3 different programs where I will work with athletes directly. And this is separate from the training programs that I have. I have a lot of on-your-own courses, that sort of help you do something specific. Like I have an injury prevention program. I have a weightlifting program called High Performance Lifting. All these programs are sort of at your own pace. You purchase it, and then you're a member for life, and you can just reuse it for all of your future training cycles. But the actual coaching is one-on-one coaching. So I'm your coach. We're in contact all the time. You have a custom plan that's built to you, your goals. We're talking about your goals and figuring out the best way to get there, and anything a running coach really does. I also have sort of a coaching light program where, let's say that you want me to build you that custom plan for this marathon or half marathon that you're getting ready for, but you either don't need the ongoing communication and accountability of a coach, or maybe you just can't afford it, then you can buy a custom training plan. So I'll work with you in a more limited capacity to build you a plan that's built for you specifically and your goals, but there's no ongoing coaching component, and that means there's no ongoing price component to it. And then finally, I have a group coaching program, which is like much more affordable coaching. So there's, I think, a couple hundred people in there right now, and they're paying a much smaller amount per month. I think it's like 1/10 the cost of one-on-one coaching. I'm not building you a custom plan, but we have a library of, I think, 30 or 35 training plans for a whole variety of goals, a whole variety of difficulty levels. And then about once a month, I'll get on a live call and just do Q&A. So I occasionally will post these Q&As as podcast episodes because I think they can be fun and sort of showcases just the range and breadth of questions that get asked in one of these monthly coaches chats. And that's a way to get more direct access to me, to get some ongoing guidance. We also have a private Facebook group, so you can tag me and ask questions in that capacity too. But it's much more affordable than private coaching. So all told, I might write 20 custom running plans a month. I'm working with, at any point in time, I'm working with about 5 to 10 athletes in my private program.
Okay.
I used to work with 25 to 30 runners, but I found that to be unsustainable. And with everything else that I have going on, I prefer a smaller roster of athletes. So, yeah, the great thing about my job is I do get to work with a lot of runners, and it gives me this unique view into the running community just because I have so much access to different runners' training histories and hopes, dreams, questions, goals, fears, etc., how they think about the sport. So it really helps me understand how runners are approaching it so I can help them best get to whatever goal they might have.
Do most of your athletes then come from, a desire of, or from a background where they desire a lot of data then? Because I know, in listening to your podcast, how important data and just looking at just scientific research and all of our studies that we as runners love to consume. But not every runner is like looking at their VO2 max, considering all of that, those other data points. They're not, one of my friends who is a runner doesn't even have a smartphone, let alone a smartwatch to track any of her training runs. Do most of your athletes who gravitate towards you have a really penchant for data?
It's interesting. I think they do, but what is also interesting is that while I love to geek out on the data and talking about VO2 max and all of the topics, if you look at, the titles of all my podcast episodes, you're probably like, wow, this guy's a huge dork, and I love it. But when it comes to the day-to-day training of runners, you don't even need a smartwatch. You don't need to know your VO2 max. We can train really, really well with effort, a little pace-based stuff. Okay, a smartwatch is helpful for that. But really, even easy pace. Easy pace isn't really a pace. It's an effort. So you don't even need to know how fast you're running on easy pace. The only time you actually need to know how fast you're running is in a race. And you don't have to worry because it's usually fully automatic timing, or in a workout. And if you really need to know your pace in a workout, you can get on a track. So you don't actually need anything more than a $30 Timex. I had a relatively successful running career, and I never once wore a smartwatch until I was basically already retired from competitive running. And every day I sort of just want to go back to the $20 Timex because I'm looking at my pace and the satellites aren't getting it, and all of a sudden, my pace slowed by 2 minutes, and then that's affecting my confidence and how I think about my performances. And so there's a dark side to the data, and I have met people who have years worth of spreadsheets of the most meaningless data that you can collect, and they're not getting the basics right. They're training for marathons off 25 miles a week, and they're barely doing any workouts, and their long runs are never consistent. It's like, what's the point of all this data if you're training very poorly? So let's get your training right. Let's focus on those fundamentals. Focus on the things that actually contribute to your progress. We can estimate a lot of things. Like when I was in college and when I was racing post-collegiately, we estimated all of our mileage. We would just go run 70 minutes and say, that was probably 10 miles. It was sort of based all on a 7-minute per mile average. And now that I'm a little older, I'm like, well, we did a lot of trail running, and we were probably running 8-minute pace. And my weekly mileage was probably 5 to 10 miles lower than what I might have been estimating. But, at the end of the day, who cares? At the end of the day, I was running almost as much as I physically could for most of my competitive years. You're always trying to push that envelope. And when it came to precision, you would run on the track and you would get really good at pacing yourself and learning the difference between, mile pace and 800 meter pace and 3K pace and 5K pace and steeplechase pace and 10K pace and lactate threshold, and you just execute it just so well on the track because you're on the track once or twice a week. But yeah, when you go out running on an easy run, hey, today I'm tired, I might be running 8-minute pace. Tomorrow I'm feeling frisky, I might be running 7-minute pace. It all averages out. And so, yeah, that's a very long-winded way of saying I like the data, but I find myself constantly pushing back against runners who want to over-index on the data. I don't think the data is actually as important as a lot of people make it out to be.
So I guess my follow-up to that is, would you ever go back to the Timex?
Well, here I am wearing my very fancy Coros Apex Pro. I like it because it's a multi-sport watch, and so I can wear it for a bike ride, I can wear it for a hike. I do like the data to look at, just to geek out on. I think if I were to start training competitively again, and be like, okay, I'm going to go after fast race times, I think what I would do is get on the track more and not use the GPS watch for track workouts. But I'd probably still use it for everything else, even though I would stop caring what the watch said. So I would just go out and run really easy, not really worry about the pace, and just sort of, run by feel. And, sometimes that might mean the first 10 minutes is god-awful slow, and the middle is mediocre, and then I'm feeling good at the end, and I'm bringing it in near marathon pace at the end, just because I feel good. And so there's a lot of variability in that, and sometimes the data makes it look like you're doing a workout or something like that, when instead you're just running by feel. So I think if I were to do it all over again, I would still use the GPS watch, but not for the most important workouts where I was on the track and I needed precision.
Are you a night runner or a day runner? This is a constant conversation piece that we have in our podcast episodes.
I think I'm like most people in that I am more likely to get my run in if I do it first thing in the morning. I prefer running in the morning. And I think I always liked running in the morning because I would run in the morning and then I didn't have to worry about training the rest of the day. I could just focus on eating. So I didn't have to worry about timing my lunch and making sure that, is there too much fat content in my lunch because that's going to be harder to digest and I only have 3 hours before this VO2 max workout, and I'd just rather not worry about all that stuff. So I like to run in the morning. The only time I'll run in the afternoon is if I have to, or if I'm doubling and I need to run again in the afternoon, which these days is very rare.
With that being said, then what are you eating before you run in the morning? Because I know it's not really advised to run on an empty stomach.
I ran on an empty stomach this morning. It's not going to kill you. You do it every once in a while. I think it's also easier for men to do that, to run fasted in the morning, than women. So there is a bit of a biological difference between the sexes when it comes to fasted running. So if you are a woman, it's probably a good idea to have something. Okay. But most of the time I'll have a banana and a cup of coffee, and I'll go running within an hour, maybe 2 of getting up. And then after the run, I'll have something more substantial. So I usually split my breakfast up into 2 smaller breakfasts rather than one normal breakfast. And I've found that works pretty well for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All of the data that I've read on all of that, at least I think I've probably actually read more female specific, because a lot of it tends to be data collected in terms of, they're studying, and we talk about, eating disorders and disordered eating with runners all the time, especially specifically female runners, though we all know plenty of male athletes who struggle with eating. And it definitely was basically you get more efficient at operating at an inefficient capacity if you don't eat before you run, or if you're fasting and running.
There's all this data showing you tend to burn a higher percentage of fat, but that doesn't mean you're burning any more calories. And runners, especially distance runners, they need to be pretty good at burning carbohydrate too, because carbohydrate is the preferred energy source of the body. If you're training for a half marathon or shorter, being in a fasted state is not going to be beneficial for you. I think there's something to be said about lower carbohydrate diets and really long events. Maybe you can get away with it if the intensity of the event is low enough. But with that said, one of the things that we're seeing in the ultra community is just an explosion of insanely fast ultra marathons, even at the 100-mile distance. And, you look at the data of these top athletes, and they're consuming 75 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour because they are running at very high intensities, even for like 15 hours. And it's just incredible. So, yeah, you shouldn't run fasted if you're doing a workout, if you're doing a long run. If you're just doing a short, easy run and you're getting up and you just want to head out the door within an hour, I don't really think that's problematic. It probably shouldn't be every day, but, like runners getting up and having a little bit of coffee and going out for an easy run, that's a tale as old as time, and you're probably going to be okay.
I feel like a lot of people stress so much about that, so that for me at least gives me permission to relax about what I'm eating before going for a run just a little bit, because I do get nervous. That's an excellent point, because runners tend to stress about the wrong things. They stress about, should I have a banana or not before my easy 4-mile run? It's like, it doesn't really matter. Or like, oh, my heart rate was 137 beats on this run. Yesterday, I did the same run and it was 134 beats. Oh my goodness, and maybe I'm getting overtrained. It's like, it just doesn't work like that. And, I could give you 1,000 examples of the things that runners worry about. And I tend to be the guy that doesn't really worry about much of anything. Hey, you're going to run fasted once in a while. No big deal. Like, all these things. Yeah, that doesn't matter. Hey, you don't have a smartwatch. We can make it work. I'm not stressing about any of these things. The things that I tend to stress about is how much are you running? How consistent are you? Are you making efforts to stay healthy by incorporating some injury resilience work into your training? These are the things that are much more likely to produce better runners rather than worrying about some minute little metric on your spreadsheet that you've been collecting since 1996. I know you talk a lot about just performance versus longevity when running, and I think you kind of answered the first part of my question, but are they mutually exclusive, and how do you help runners shift from one to another as a coach? That's a really good question. They can be somewhat mutually inclusive, but for the most part, they're not. It's just that when you are chasing performance, you tend to take more risks. And you tend to do things that might be good for performance, but maybe not necessarily great for longevity. So there's a reason why the world record holder in the marathon, Kelvin Kiptum, rest in peace, was running 170, 180 miles a week. Because volume and mileage matter, especially for endurance events. But it's really hard to make the argument that running like a marathon every day is the best thing for your overall longevity. Like at that level, I get a little bit concerned about the stress on your heart. I'm also just concerned about, the risk of running injuries goes up and the risk of it becoming something chronic that not maybe right now, but maybe 2 or 3 decades into the future, you have mobility problems because of an old running injury that you never really took care of because you were really chasing that performance and you made it worse because of that. And then it becomes this habit and you have a poor gait cycle and so many knock-on effects can then happen because of that. So I do think when you're chasing performance, you do tend to do things that if your goal was simply longevity, you probably wouldn't do. So for example, right now, I'm a little bit more interested in longevity than I am in performance because I am a 40-year-old with 3 kids, and I was very fortunate to have run cross-country, indoor track, and outdoor track for all 4 years of high school and college. I then competed for 9 years post-collegiately. I wrung every ounce of performance out of myself that I could, for the most part, I think. I would have tweaked a couple things, but that's a whole conversation for another day. But at this point, I am never going to touch the times that I was able to run when I was 24 years old and drunk on testosterone, just having the hormonal ability to perform at that level, but also to recover
from that work. And so now my focus is much more on longevity. So what am I doing? I'm running less. I'm doing more cycling and hiking and those kinds of cross training. I'm strength training more. So I'm doing less sport-specific exercise, which is running, but I'm doing more other things. Hiking, cycling, strength training. I'll go play basketball or, mess around with my kids in a way that I might be very hesitant to do if I had 85, 90 miles a week on my legs and, I was sore from a workout. I was like, I'm tired. I don't want to get hurt. Now I don't have that fatigue, and so I'll wrestle with them and I'll play tag at the playground, which is a very challenging thing to do as a 4-year-old with no warming up. So just be careful. But I do tend to think, just think about the Boston marathoner who's desperate, or the marathoner who's desperately trying to qualify for Boston. What are they doing? A lot of these runners are running like 3 marathons a year, and they're going into marathon training, and then they're getting out of it, and they're going right back into marathon training. It's this never-ending cycle. I don't think that's the best thing for you physically. I think all that running with less focus on power, strength, VO2 max, there's something to be said about when you over-focus on one thing, it's probably not best for longevity. And we could probably do this in a lot of other sports too. Do I think Tour de France cyclists are optimizing for longevity? Hell no. Do I think power lifters who are absolutely focused on as much weight as they can lift with zero cardiovascular fitness whatsoever? I don't really think that's probably the best route either. It's probably this hybrid approach that values not stressing about things and keeping things fun and easy, and also exercising with people, including that social component.
Do you define strength training for running or runners in a different way than just general strength training?
Yeah, I think if you're a distance runner and you want to strength train in a way that is going to help you become the best runner you can be, there's a certain way to go about that. And you're not going to be doing things like lifting like Arnold Schwarzenegger used to back in the day. He's in the gym 6 days a week, 2, 3.
So this is a first for Happy Pace, where we've had a technical difficulty that was due to Wi-Fi connectivity, since typically we record all of our episodes on site while running. So I'm sorry, I apologize for this glitch. We'll continue dropping back into the conversation.
I like it. It's going to be helpful, especially for very running specific muscles, maybe your hips, your glutes, things like that. And especially for injury-prone runners or runners who have a certain problem. Yeah, you want to do a little bit of isolation work around that, but for the most part, we want to be focusing on movements. And the basics work the best. Squat, deadlift, something like a bench press or an overhead press are fantastic. And the goal is threefold, I think. The goal is, number one, let's get stronger. Stronger runners are better runners. We're going to have more fatigue resistance. I think anyone who's finished a marathon or an ultra marathon, the next day you're sore in like your shoulders sometimes, and like your upper body can be sore. And you're like, wow, how did that happen? It's like, well, those really long races are very stressful in ways that, even an easy 20-mile long run is not. And so being strong holistically is really important. But we also need to build some running-specific power. What is running fast? It is exerting a lot of force into the ground so that you have a long flight phase. So it's very strong, hard, fast steps that then produce very long steps. So the only way to do that is really to get stronger, to build your endurance, and take more forceful steps against the ground. One of the best ways to practice that is with heavy weightlifting. So we're not lifting for endurance. That's another thing we don't really want to do. We get enough of an endurance stimulus when we're out there doing our running. That's all we're focused on for the most part with our running. But in the weight room, we have different goals. We have strength, we have power. Power is basically strength expressed quickly. So we can do power movements, we can do plyometrics. And the other thing is injury resilience. And if I had to add a fourth, it would be running economy, improving our overall athleticism and coordination so that we are using less energy, less oxygen for a given effort. And so if your strength training's on point, you're going to get those benefits. But not if you're lifting like a bodybuilder, not if you're lifting for endurance. So in other words, you're doing like 4 or 5 sets of an exercise with very high repetitions and relatively low weight. That's kind of a lifting setup that we want to stay away from. And then finally, the other type of strength training that probably isn't the most helpful for runners is if you're just taking a lot of random classes. You know, you go to the gym and you're like, oh, well, there's this body pump class, and then I'm going to take this, 2-week weightlifting course, and the next thing you know, you're doing a Peloton strength workout. You can just sort of bounce around from approach to approach to approach. You're not progressing. It's like a training plan. It has to progress and build on itself. And this, grab bag approach just doesn't really give you all that you need. So I would have runners really look at their training and be like, okay, what am I doing that isn't very helpful? Can I get in the gym, say, twice a week, lift relatively heavy weight? I have a weightlifting program that's periodized, which I think is another very important aspect of strength training. Let's say you have a 16-week marathon cycle in front of you, you're starting on day 1. If you go to the gym that week, what you do in the gym should look very, very different than what you do in the gym in week 15 of that 16-week plan. You're a week and a half out from a marathon. You shouldn't be doing the same stuff that you were doing 3.5 months ago. So just like your running changes and evolves over time, so should your strength training. So that addresses one of the other problems I see, which is just kind of doing the same workouts all the time. Maybe you have a little bit of a routine that you love to do, after some of your runs, and you've been doing that same routine for 10 years. Like, there's some value in doing some more physical therapy-oriented bodyweight exercises, some maybe a little bit more isolation work that's targeted to running specific muscles or problems that you have, but we also need to be getting into the gym and progressing, getting stronger, and working on those other skills.
Something that I've personally stolen from you when I'm out on runs, especially trail runs, always something I say, and I always say I got it from strength training, but I always say we're not running for today's run, we're running for tomorrow's run, because I know you said that a couple times, and I love that, and other people on the trail always love that saying, so it's definitely something.
Pull it from someone else.
Oh, really?
It's basically like, don't do anything today that's going to prevent you from running tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
If you think more long term, it helps you have more perspective so that, should I run 2 more miles than I'm supposed to today with a friend at a faster pace? That's going to jeopardize tomorrow's run. You have no idea how your body's going to react to that. Let's not do that. Let's do what we're supposed to be doing today so that we live to run another day.
And let's do our strength training so that, once we hit a rock on that trail or hit a curb, your ankle it's not a running ending injury, is what I think that's something that you've said the one time specifically. Again, big fan.
Well, it's a good point because it's a good point. I made it. Oh my God. Listen. What we're talking about is basically strength training is like armor, right? It gives you a certain level of protection against mistakes. If you fall on the trail, if you're a little bit stronger and, also coordinated because you've been doing some Olympic lifts in the gym and plyometrics, maybe you catch yourself and you don't slam your knee into that rock like you might have. Or if you do end up going running with that fast friend for a longer run that you had planned, that strength training might allow you to get away with it. So it allows you to sort of make more mistakes in your training, whether that's stepping off the curb wrong or making a training error type of mistake where you do something that's a little bit too fast, a little bit too long, too soon before you're ready for it. And the strength training will just sort of give you a little bit more flexibility for poor training, which I think is great because no training is perfect. You're going to make mistakes. So let's stack the deck in your favor so that you have as many advantages as possible. Strength training is a huge advantage.
What are some running myths that you've had to unlearn or relearn
Good question. I mean, one of them was definitely, I don't need to strength train. I remember specifically telling a friend of mine, I don't need to do any strength training. My legs are getting so much exercise as is. And that was a complete mistake of mine, just a silly mindset to have when you consider all of the research and practical case studies of like literally every elite runner that's out there. That's a good question. Other myths that I've had to unlearn. I used to be very adamant about static stretching before running, and now I no longer do pretty much any static stretching. Occasionally, sort of like that isolation strength work. Occasionally, I'll stretch something out if it feels a little tight, but it doesn't really have any impact on your injury risk, and that's really why I was doing it. So, yes, it can make you feel better, which subjectively is, I think, a good thing. We always want to do things to make running as easy as possible, right? Running is hard. If doing some static stretching at the end of the day makes you feel good, I don't have a problem with it. But I have stopped putting stretching on a pedestal. It's not going to help you stay healthy. It doesn't really give you too many benefits. There's other things like strength training, like yoga, any kind of mobility work that is going to provide more value. So, yeah, I don't really do too much static stretching. I don't advise my runners to do it. I'll sort of have the same conversation where it's like, well, look, if you like it, sure. Do it at the very end of the training session. Definitely don't do it before you go running, because that's not really the goal of a warm-up. I think at the beginning of my running career, I didn't realize the value of mileage and volume. And then I started going to cross-country camps at Brown and Dartmouth. So I went to Dartmouth after my sophomore year, going in as a rising junior, and then I went to Brown as a rising senior. And that was really educational, because who are the counselors at these camps? They are these Ivy League Division I cross-country runners who are very good. And you learn almost through osmosis and through a lot of the conversations that you have that they're all running so much mileage. And I was like, oh, well, if they're doing it, then I need to be doing it too. I'm probably never going to touch these D1 times that, are like, oh, you're a 13:57 5K runner. That's nice. I'm never going to do that. But I can try to run more. Relatively speaking, more is generally better. And that lesson was then very much ingrained in me as a college athlete. My college cross-country coach, who's the assistant track coach, was always talking about mileage. When we had a problem with our running, what's the answer? More mileage. It's kind of a joke, but it did fix a lot of problems, because if you're having any kind of performance issue, simply expanding your aerobic fitness is a long-term, effective way to do that. And so I have now come down pretty strongly in favor of more running is almost always better. Now, progressive overload, which is really what we're talking about here, doesn't mean you do it all at one time. A lot of runners are like, I'm running 30 miles a week. I can't run 70. I'm like, no, you can't, but maybe you can run 32 next week and then go from there, right? That's the whole idea of progressive overload. It's incremental, it's strategic, methodical, and of course, gradual. So I'm a big fan of higher mileage now. The marathon world record holder, like we talked about, was running very high mileage. That's obviously not going to be possible for us mere mortals, but we can learn from the principle. And if you do want to become the best runner you can be, I've realized that you do have to figure out the maximum amount of running that you're capable of doing in a given time period, whether we're talking about weekly mileage or even monthly mileage, which I like to focus on too. You've got to figure that out, because if you're not stressing your body as much as you reasonably can, then you're not going to be progressing as much as you can either. So those are, I would say, three things I've had to unlearn. But for the most part, I got to give a lot of credit to my coaches. They really gave me a pretty good foundation upon which to experience running. And then, when I got my coaching certification and I read so many training books and started coaching myself, it all mapped really well to my lived experience. And that was really helpful for me as a coach.
So do you feel that junk miles exist? People will kind of throw out that phrase, junk miles.
If I had to choose yes or no, I would say no, they don't exist, because more running is just going to increase your aerobic fitness. But there can be instances in which the running that you're doing isn't very productive. So if you're running all your mileage at at way too hard of an effort, then yeah, I might say that's junk mileage because it's really in terms of the intensity of the running that you're doing. I would say runners who never take any break from running are probably engaging in some junk mileage. I'm sitting here talking about the value of high mileage and working hard and consistency, but at the same time, there are times when you need to run low mileage. There are times when you need to take a break from running entirely. There are times when you shouldn't be doing any workouts. So there's a time and a place for everything. But I think for the most part, junk mile it's an idea that convinces a lot of runners to run less. And so I think the effect of it is a net negative.
I was kind of curious, going back to the higher mileage, because I have seen that work for myself personally. How I know there's the 80-20 rule of 80% should be easy runs versus 20% should be harder. Do you ever categorize that, or I guess kind of explain that a little more to me if you use that strategy?
Yeah, so the 80-20 principle was I think popularized by Matt Fitzgerald. We jokingly say we're brothers from different mothers, and it basically says 80% of your volume should be easy and 20% is hard, some workout capacity. I agree with this approach. It was a split observed in professional runners. I think it can be intense for beginner to moderate or intermediate runners. If, let's say you're running 40 miles a week, to have 8 miles of higher intensity running is a lot, especially when you consider that it's really the 20% is anaerobic running. So even if you go out for a tempo run and you're running lactate threshold, I think that technically counts for the 80%. I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to go back. So I do think it can be a little intense. I'm a little bit more in favor of 85-15 or 90-10. But when it does come to mileage building, if you're approaching mileage levels that you've never run before, let's say you have a marathon in December. You're running the California International Marathon. We're recording this very early July. You have a long time to train, right? You're probably not going to spend 5 months or 6 months training for one marathon. So you should split this time into 2. You can have a base training phase and then your marathon phase. Your marathon phase might be a little bit more like 80-20, maybe 85-15, maybe 90-10, because it is a marathon. You don't need that much high-intensity work. But the base training phase that comes first might be 95-5, because the real goal of that phase of training is to run more mileage, to get your long run up, to get your overall mileage up. Maybe you're used to running 3 to 4 days a week. I want you to get comfortable running 4 days a week all the time, and occasionally 5 days a week. If you're used to running 30 to 40 miles during marathon training, I want you to peak at 45 in base training. It's not going to be as hard because you're not doing the workouts. So if you're always adhering to 80-20, it's going to be hard to reach the next level with mileage. And then when you get into your marathon cycle, of course, take a little bit break in between, get your engines back to neutral, reset. So when your marathon training cycle begins, you're coming off of a phase of training where you have just worked on your aerobic fitness, which is much more important for the marathon, but you didn't really pay attention to 80-20. It was, maybe you did a short, relatively easy workout during the week. You're just getting your legs turning over, but it wasn't hard. It was, you're just playing around, having fun. But then when you get into marathon training, you could do a more traditional approach, but now instead of running 30 to 40 miles, maybe now you're running 35 to 45 miles. And if you repeat that every, 4 to 6 months, a year from now, you might be running 60 miles a week. And that is how you build mileage in the long term. People want to think in terms of weeks, even months. I want to think in terms of quarters and years when it comes to reaching very high mileage levels. Because I know, I've sat around and talked about in my peak training days, I ran 80 to 90 miles a week. It took me 7 years of consistent building to that to even get comfortable with that, where I could get up every day and run 10, 11 miles, and then occasionally double and do a long run, 15 to 20 miles. You know, it's little bites of the apple, a little bit at a time as you build those mileage levels. And when you are in a mileage building phase of training where, you know, you are in uncharted territory, you've just hit a weekly mileage PR, you're going to stay there, maybe in a week or two you're going to go up again. That's when you need to really dial back the intensity because you're stressing yourself with volume rather than with a faster pace.
That's great.
Really, really, really thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Jason.
That's it for this episode of Happy Pace. Like this episode and channel if you found your happy pace while listening. Subscribe to us on Spotify, YouTube, and now Apple Podcasts. You can find us on social media at happy_pace_podcast on Instagram and TikTok. Email us happypace@houseofmachka.com if you have any questions, comments, and ideas for guests. This is a House of Machka production. Our music is written, performed, and recorded by Grant Underhill, Mike Plasmeier, and Jake Laconte. Our graphic designer is Rachel Slingluff. Our marketing manager is Gretchen Brune. This episode was recorded and edited by Elaine Sims.
So that's how we got to 26.2 miles. Thank you now. Good morning. Wait a second. Casey, we got a shot already this morning. Thank you. My hey. Hi, Bonnie. Morning. Hi, dog. Morning. Hi. Morning. 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 Hey, Drew. Hey, Elaine, that's Drew. Morning. Morning. Oh, hey, Kim. It's great. I knew someone that I ran past. Morning. 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 Good job. I'm sorry. Morning. 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 Also really need to go to the bathroom. Morning. 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 And morning. Morning. It is Betty. Morning.
Morning. I'm going to get back up and do it
Morning.
again.
Hey,
Here
guys.
it is.
Hey, Luke.
It's past some of the Big River Racing team.
That's perfect.
That was perfect.
Morning. But, morning.
Morning. Oh,
Yeah.
hey, Rita. Do you want to be
Morning.
on the podcast? We're recording right now.
Elaine is recruiting her next podcast guest.
Yeah.
It's a good thing I'm smiling.
Hi, Haley.
Haley, yeah,
We're on right now.
yeah.
We're recording.
Say
Hi.
hi. Good morning. 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 Hi, Sarah. Hi, Lauren. Morning. 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 Sorry. Morning. 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 I think. Good morning. 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 Good morning. Morning.
Morning.
Hey! How are you?
Hey, hey. Hey, hey. Hey, hey.